In this video we're going to be looking at something called ROM. And ROM stands for Read Only Memory. And so with read-only memory, you may well have heard this word ROM before in CD-ROM. And so here, ROM means read-only memory, C is a compact disc. So you've bought a disc where when you buy it, the information's on, the software's on, or the music is on, and that's read-only. You can't change what is on there. And what we're looking at in this video is a small chip which is called a ROM. And so this chip sits on the motherboard, or it sits in the computer system, and the information on it cannot be changed. Originally, it really could not be changed, and these are called a mask ROM. So these chips are mask ROMs, and when the chip is manufactured, the program or the information is put onto the ROM at manufacture time, and then it cannot be changed ever. That's what that chip does, and that's all it has on it. More lately, there is something called an EEPROM, also known as flash ROM. And an EEPROM stands for an electrically erasable programmable read-only memory. Bit of a mouthful, but all it means is I can put electricity through it and then wipe the ROM, and then I can program it again to have a different ROM image on it, which will have my programs and my software on. The question comes, what's the point? Why do we bother with these ROMs? And here is the answer. So the first thing is, when I load up a computer, inside my computer there is a ROM. What's the point in this thing being there inside my PC? So when I turn on the computer, it doesn't know what to do. So it goes to the ROM and it finds something called a bootstrap, also known as a boot. So I boot my computer, or I turn on my computer and boot it. It finds the bootstrap, which tells it where it can find the operating system, so that it can then load the operating system. It's also got something else on it called a BIOS. And BIOS stands for Basic Input-Output System. So my ROM will also store some very, very simple information about perhaps video and perhaps hard disk controllers. It also stores some basic information about the date and time, for instance. So if you go into your BIOS on a computer, that's stored on a ROM. That little piece of software is on a ROM, and you can change things like the date and time, how many hard disks you've got, how the hard disks are set up, possibly what video drivers are needed. And this is a very, very low level, very close to the hardware, and it's just getting that computer going at the beginning. It could indeed store a whole operating system on a ROM. However, we tend not to do that. We tend to have it on a hard disk where we can make changes constantly and load it into RAM later. So the core thing which a ROM will do for us is a bootstrap, a boot, and a BIOS. The other thing which ROMs do for us is they are non-volatile. And this means that the information stored on them doesn't change. So not only is it read-only, but it's always there. If we turn off the computer and turn it on again, it's still there. The information hasn't gone. Much like on a hard disk, the information is still there, but with RAM, when we turn it off, it disappears. It's volatile. So ROMs are non-volatile. And we can also look at some other uses which we use ROMs for. So not just in a PC, we can also use ROMs, for instance, in a digital camera. So a ROM will be in here, which tells it how to take the photo, how to process it, how to store it on an SD card, for instance. A ROM will be used inside an MP3 player, and so that will have the software on to read the MP3s and to then translate them into the music which will be played on the headphones. A ROM could also be inside a set-top box, and that will have the software to decode the signal and create the image, and also to put on the display which programs you're watching at the moment. So all these devices contain ROMs. And these days we know that you can update these ROMs, so even on a camera you can update the functionality of the camera, you can update the software on an MP3 player, and that's because they're using these EEPROMs, and so it's possible to wipe them and then put on a new image with the new software. Doing this process is very, very slow, which is why we still consider them to be ROMs rather than RAMs. So even though we can change what they say and we can wipe them, we still think of them as a read-only memory and a ROM.